Great. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight for our Clean Water Action, Be a Clean Water Voter, Voting Rights in Time of COVID virtual town hall. Tonight, primary election is only 5 days away in this critical election year, and we have lucky enough to have two election experts with us to talk about the best ways to vote, and best ways to remain safe voting this year in this in the election in the age of COVID here. And before we get started, there was a really great quote that I wanted to share from earlier today. As many of you know, Representative John Lewis passed away earlier this month, and his funeral was this morning or this afternoon. And before he died, he wrote a letter that was published in this morning's New York Times. And Representative Lewis, of course, marched and sacrificed so much for the Voting Rights Act before it was passed in the 1960s, and was a champion of voting rights across his life. And what he said in the New York Times today just really stuck with me, that ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful, nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. And it couldn't be more critical than it is this year for all of us to get out and use that right. We know that if we seek a more just society, as Representative Lewis did, and if we want to address the climate crisis and protect our Great Lakes, voting and electing champions for our democracy and for our environment are critical. So tonight, I'm really glad to be joined by two election experts to discuss all you need to know for voting in this year's elections. As many of you probably remember, in 2018, Michigan voters overwhelmingly approved a ballot initiative to make our voting process more accessible to voters and more secure. So we'll discuss those changes, and we'll also discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced voting behavior so far this year, and how you can stay safe while also making your voice heard. As our conversation begins, for those of you watching on Zoom, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be taking audience questions throughout the evening. And if you're watching on Facebook, please type your questions straight into the chat, and we have people monitoring that who will make sure that we get those questions as well. So now I'd like to introduce Michigan Department of State Deputy Chief of Staff, Zaineb Hussein, and Lansing City Clerk, Chris Swope. Welcome, Zaineb and Chris. Can you two please introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your experience with elections and what your jobs are really, and how you work to protect and expand voting rights. So let's start with you, Zaineb. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Sean. So Zaineb Hussein, Deputy Chief of Staff for the Department of State. Full disclaimer, I am not necessarily our expert in elections with the department. You can imagine that our experts are knee deep in all the work in preparing for the election. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. My experience with elections has been great. It's been with the Department of State, and with what we'll get into with the new voting laws. It's been a whirlwind of excitement on this side to see the changes. So I'm really excited for this conversation. And I really appreciate the invitation from Clearwater Fund to have this important conversation, such a pivotal time in Michigan's history.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Chris Swope, thanks for joining. Please take a minute to introduce yourself.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am the Chris Swope. I'm the City Clerk of the City of Lansing. I am also the President of the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks and past President now of the Capital Area Clerks Association. I was first elected as Lansing City Clerk in 2005, and so I'm currently in my fourth term. Seems like just yesterday, sometimes it seems like 100 years ago. And we'll get into it, I think, a little bit more, but Proposal 3 of 2018 made me totally relearn my job, because almost every rule change that I had dealt with for the past 15 years. So it's a great expansion. So much of it is what many clerks had advocated for decades that we could not get the legislature to budge on. So I'm just so glad that this proposal was put forward and gave the voters, put the tools in the voters' hands to give them their own voting rights. Look forward to chatting with you, and thank you, Clean Water Action.
Yeah, thank you both very much. And so our first question here tonight is for Zaineb. If you could just walk us through some of the changes that Chris mentioned with the 2018 ballot initiative and how they changed Michigan's election laws. And then if you could just share a little bit about how the Secretary of State, who, for those of you who may not know, Secretary of State is in charge of administering our elections on the state level, how you've been implementing the changes and what, if any, effect you've noticed on election behavior since 2018 because of them.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So I'm really excited for this particular question because I'm looking forward to hearing Chris's response, because it's really interesting to see, the clerk who's getting a lot of the same day voter registration. So what is Prop 3? Proposal 3 was a landmark moment in Michigan's history. It was the expansion of voting rights, which included a wide range of voting with no reason absentee. And it was really, and also, voting with, same day voter registration, and then also the no excuse absentee, which I mentioned. And that really expanded democracy. You always hear the secretary say that, her mission is to make voting easy, but harder to cheat. And what this proposal did was it made democracy more accessible to our voters. So if our voters wanted to vote from home, they didn't have to, they didn't need a reason to do so, which, we'll later in this conversation, we'll see how important that is with the current pandemic that we're in. So how have we been implementing? So it's been, our first year here at the Department of State, automatic voter registration was carried out by our branch offices, which means if you came in for an ID or a driver's license transaction, you would be automatically registered, and you would be asked to, and if you don't want to, you don't have to, but this is something that created a lot of, we had it in the past, and now this is something that's expanding the voter registration, access to voter registration. It also helps us clean our voter registration list. So when someone is coming to do a transaction at our branch offices, we can ask them the question of, has your address changed? Is there any discrepancy with your voter registration? So that's kind of the branch piece of this and how we've been implementing it on our end. Registration through election day, thousands took advantage in March, and it was just overwhelming. Our team was on the ground on election day, and the same day voter registration, clerk's offices were packed with people coming in and registering and executing their constitutional right to register on election day. No reason absentee rates. The absentee rates went up by 350% compared to the 2016 election. I mean, think about that for a second, 350% compared to 2016. So this is really an exciting time in our history. And this particular this proposal really did expand the rights of Michiganders to engage in democracy.
Great, thanks very much. And Chris, I'd love to get your take on sort of what you've seen. And I know specifically in 2019, Lansing had one pretty hotly contested city council race, and it was amazing to see how fast you were able to get all the absentees in that race.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, and as I said, a few minutes ago, Proposal 3 of 2018 really changed all the rules. And it's been quite a process to learn it, implement it, and educate the voters as well as our election workers. All of which are important aspects of it. So the no reason absentee voting really led to a huge increase in the number of voters who want to participate and who are willing and able to participate. we sent a citywide mailing in 2019 to every registered voter who wasn't already on our permanent absent voter list, inviting them to be on that list. And we had a huge increase in that number, and that led to an overall increase in turnout of over 25%, comparing our 2019 election to the similar election, which is 2015, because, you know, like the federal cycles, everything's kind of a 4-year cycle. You can't really compare it to 2017 because there's a mayoral election in 17. 19, it was only city council, and quite frankly, not all of them were that strongly contested. Not all of the candidates were as strong in all the races. One ward was hugely contested. Well, 2 wards were hugely contested, but we saw a huge increase in turnout, with really not the campaigns driving it. And usually that's what drives turnout. So it's clearly that voter participation from home, that convenience voting, that made a huge difference. And, you know, I thought going into those elections, oh, we're not going to see people show up on election day and do same day registration. Ha, I was totally wrong. You know, we had dozens, which doesn't sound like a lot, but, you know, in an election, when you get, you know, 12, 15% historically turnout, people actually wanting to show up and register that day and vote that day, was just really enheartening to me. But it has changed the way we have to train ourselves and our election workers. All of our messaging had to change. We have to teach our election workers that if a voter shows up and they aren't on your list, you don't say, no, you can't vote. You don't say, you know, you have to fill out this provisional form. You know, the whole training and messaging from the word go has changed from the law says no to the Constitution says yes. And we want to find a way to that yes and where you need to go to get that yes. So, you know, we work very hard on that, educating the voters through that mailing, letting them know about the absentee availability for every registered voter. The same day registration, and that goes to both absentees as well as registration forms. You know, we get a registration form in the mail in the last 2 weeks. We send them a notice saying, hey, you know, it came in the mail, so it doesn't count for this election unless you come in person. So please come in person to my office during these hours. It's a huge educational aspect. And you know, even retraining my staff who works with me every day, and I have a great team. I could not do what I do without the team that I have in my office, and they are so willing to learn and so able to learn and implement new things, and getting to that yes, you can vote and here is how, has just been an amazing difference to see. You know, and so many of those changes we had advocated for so long. It's so great to see them in place now. And, you know, and then one of the other changes that really hasn't been mentioned is it's now a constitutional right in Michigan to have an audit of the results of an election. So I participated in a pilot of the first risk limiting audits in the state of Michigan. I think that is the gold standard, the best way to provide an audit. It's efficient and effective in terms of verifying the results of our elections, and I think it's important. So, you know, I use several methods to educate folks. We do press releases pretty consistently. It's pretty rare that I get a press call that I don't return pretty quickly, and so we're able to get into the mainstream media a lot. We use social media, and sometimes we boost posts. You know, we do everything we can to get our message out. I've done a few Facebook Lives. Those aren't sometimes easy, but we do them. We do direct mail You know, we haven't gone door to door, but we do a lot of events. I have a great team of not just my staff, but some of our election workers are willing to volunteer their time outside of election day, as well as some of the local advocacy groups, such as the League of Women Voters and A. Philip Randolph Institute, are willing to work with us. And so we can go to events and have a voter registration table and an information table and, you know, put that information out where the people are. That's been a little bit harder this year, but we hope to get back at that when we can.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. And you know, one of the things that you touched on, Chris, was the fact that you sort of preemptively sent applications out to all Lansing residents prior to the 2019 election, which I thought was great. And Zaineb, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was sort of about how you know, how the logistics went with that and everything when Secretary Benson, who you know, again, for those watching who may not know, Secretary Benson is likely one of the most overqualified people for her job that there is. I don't know of any other elected official who interviewed so many other people in that position and then wrote a book about how to do that position the right way before getting elected to it. But I wanted to ask you, Zaineb, about when the Secretary of State's office decided to send out absentee applications. Can you just walk us through sort of how that process looked like and why you thought that was the right move to make when you guys made it?
If I could just go back to the first question and what to Chris's comment, because I think that there is ways that we can try to on the education piece, and I think Chris just nailed it, right? Because I think the most important thing that we can do is educate the community to what their rights are and what is accessible to them. And one of the things that I'd like to mention is you can actually register to vote, and you can fill out your AV application online through our website. And I would encourage all to do that. And you'd still have the same, you know, register same day voter registration, which is great. But I can assure you that our clerks will have their hands full with many other things. And because of COVID-19, kind of going into, you know, why these applications were sent out. I mean, when we talked about, when we look at, you know, how everyone had to kind of pivot based on this pandemic that was global. And one of the things that we never steered away from was, you know, that election was going to happen. There was no question about that. And how can we ensure the safety and security of our voters at the same time, and giving them the option of, you know, voting from home. And that's when, you know, the Bureau of Elections under the leadership of Jonathan Brader had, with obviously the leadership of the secretary, made the decision of mailing out AV applications. It just made sense. You know, this is a new right, and we wanted to ensure that this was a piece of like education material for us. It was saying that, you know, this was something that was overwhelmingly was passed, and this is your right to, if you want to, and it wasn't something that was forced. You can still go to the polling locations, but if you want to vote from home, you have the option now. And we've seen a huge increase in voter AV applications that were submitted. And it really it stemmed from, you know, ensuring that we were looking at our voters and making sure that we gave them, you know, access to democracy, but we were thinking of their safety and their security at the same time. And I'm really proud of the way that the department, you know, acted quickly upon, you know, a lot of in March, elections went smoothly. We've seen a lot of same day voter registration, which was great, but we learned a lot. And in partnership with the clerks, you know, we were able to make adjustments, you know, come to August. So that was kind of the gist of it, was, you know, what can we do to ensure that, one, we're educating our voters on their right to vote from home. And, you know, with this current pandemic, we want to ensure that, you know, their safety and their security is above all the first of our priorities.
Great, thank you so much. And just to clarify, so and it's so great that, and I know my wife and I actually both did the voter absentee online application through Secretary of State. So we both always like to vote in person, but this year it seems like it might be a better idea to do it absentee. so we decided to do that. But just to clarify, so if somebody, let's say I'm a non-registered voter right now, but eligible to vote, and I really want to vote next Tuesday, if I go online today and submit that online application, will I be able to vote next Tuesday at my polling place, or will it be something different I have to do?
We would highly recommend you go to the clerk's office and ensure that you can check your registration online as well from our portal. And if you are not registered, you would have to go to your clerk's office to register.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. And Jen, can you please just drop the link in there to the Secretary of State's website in our chat for folks to go so they can check if they're registered.
And Sean, I want to add in there, we have a very high voter registration rate in Michigan. So we have people who aren't sure if they're registered to vote. Most people are. Michigan has been a leader in motor voter. So many people don't know if they're registered or don't think they're registered or don't realize that their registration address has been updated. So that website, you can just verify whether you're registered, and you can update it or register if you need to. But I'm pretty sure it's set up so that it automatically, if you register or change your address and it's too close to the election, it's going to give you a message of what you need to do to vote in your new location for this election. I think that's kind of built in automatic so that folks who do that aren't left wondering and don't show up when they haven't done the steps that they need to take. There are some steps if you are registering in that last 14 days. You do need to come in person to the clerk's office with that verification of your residency in order to get that ballot either right then and there or on election day.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. It's great with the new law. It's essentially for if you're not registered or you're not sure if you're registered, you can kind of do one-stop shopping at your clerk's office and go and make sure you're registered and vote right then and there. And cool, and we have the link in the chat there for michigan.gov/vote to check out and make sure that you're registered and where exactly your polling place is, etc. So we have a lot more to get into here tonight. So Chris, you've spent the last 15 years as a clerk here in Michigan, and I was hoping you could walk us through sort of what the clerk's role is in supervising elections. And also, as I'm sure you're both aware, there have been a lot of rumors, especially this year, stemming from people in high office about the propensity for election fraud. So Chris, could you just sort of walk us through how you prepare for these elections, what your role is in supervising the elections, and how common this rampant voter fraud that we're told about from the White House actually is?
Okay, sure. So elections actually don't just happen on election day. There's an aspect of elections that happens year round. People update their address, register to vote, move out of state, move into state, die, turn 18, all these things, voter registration events that happen on a year-round basis. And so, we work hand in hand with the Secretary of State to keep those registration records up to date. But we're the kind of the front line of that part. We send every voter a voter identification card that tells them where they can go to vote on election day, and provide those notices that go in the paper of an election. But honing more narrowly in on an election, what a local clerk does, it's a lot of preparation. We have, in my office, we have what we call our election countdown, and it's a spreadsheet that we have a list of about 80 tasks, some big, some small, and a due date for them. And, we're counting down, about 60 days before an election, everything from communicating with our polling places to make sure that they know the dates of the election in every year, and what day we're going to deliver the equipment, and what day we're going to pick up the equipment, and what day the election workers are going to come in and set up before election day, and what hours they have to be open on election day. So, those types of communications. We have to recruit and hire our election workers. So that's kind of an ongoing thing. And I say recruit and hire because they aren't volunteers, they're actually paid. In Lansing, we start people at $12 an hour. And then some of the roles have a higher pay, but we have to recruit them, train them, schedule them for their specific location, what hours they're going to work, and what tasks they'll be doing. So we have, total control over that. And we're lucky in Lansing to have a lot of great people, but I can tell you this year, a lot of people are a little bit afraid, and we've had some people backing out as we get closer to the election who don't want to be in the public right now. We also have to determine how many ballots we think we need for each precinct, and each precinct has a different ballot. Even if there's all the same offices on it, each precinct has to have its own ballot. So we have to make those determinations. We have to send out the applications for absent voter ballots. Usually it's just to the people on our permanent absent voter list. This year ended up going to every registered voter. And then we have to schedule in the computer all of those ballots. We have to double check, triple check various things like that. Joe Schmo wants his ballot to go to Kalamazoo because he's at school this autumn, and Jane Doe is in California taking care of her mom, so she needs her ballot sent there. Marissa is in the military, so she's entitled to an email ballot, and Jane lives overseas, so we got to figure out how she wants her ballot. All these things with so many specific different individual scenarios that we have to take care of. And then not only do we send them out, assemble them, and there's about 5 things that go into the envelope. Then once they come back, we have to record that we received them and keep track. And we've issued in Lansing, as of today, 22,201 ballots. And we've received about 13,000 of those back. We have to make sure that our hand count of those 13,000 matches exactly our computer count of those 13,000, because we can't be off by even one, even though it's 13,000, even though 3 million people are going to vote across the state. We make sure we haven't lost a single vote. And then on election day, we have to oversee everything that happens in the precincts. And you never know what's going to happen in a precinct. We had, trying to remember when it was. I think it was in March. I don't even remember. It blurs together. We had a team go into their polling place, put all their stuff down, walk back outside to get something else. The door shut behind them. The door was still locked. The key was inside with all the stuff they had put down. And we had about 45 minutes to set up a makeshift precinct outside by 7 o'clock so that the voter who got there at 7 o'clock could vote without waiting. So a lot of it is preparation, but it's also think at the last second and just get the job done so that the voter gets to vote. Some of the other things that we do on election day, obviously now we have same day registration. So we'll, for August, we'll have, I'm gonna guess we have over 50 people register in the city of Lansing on election day. I'm gonna guess in November, we're probably gonna have over 200 or maybe more register on election day at our office. So while we're dealing with that, we're also running the absent voter counting board. Every ballot then has to be opened, compare the ballot number on the label to the ballot number inside of the envelope, make sure that it matches, open that ballot in a way, and we have like these techniques so that by the time you're opening the ballot, you don't know whose ballot it is. and then run them through the scanner. In Lansing, we use a high speed. Some communities use just a regular tabulator. And then at the end of the night, those however many ballots we said we had in the absent voter counting board, we have to make sure that's exactly how many we counted. Can't be off by one, even if it's, 20,000 in Lansing. Same thing in the precinct. They have to make sure that the number of voters that walked in the door, that's how many ballots went into that tabulator. And then we review all of our documentation and electronically send it to the county, and then we take our follow-up paperwork to the county. So, and then there's probably about a week worth of work or more after the election that we do. So just following up. Voters have a right, if they aren't on the list and they believe they've registered, they can vote a provisional ballot. That's their choice, not our choice. So instead of coming to the clerk's office to register in person the same day, they can vote a provisional ballot at the precinct, and they have up to 6 days to follow up on that and provide any necessary proofs. So the election, while we have preliminary results, unofficial results, election night usually, it's not tied with a bow for several days or even weeks until it's fully certified.
Wow, so that sounds like a very intense process.
And get sort of tying it back to the election fraud question that you asked. We see so few cases that really doesn't happen. The things that we see are voters that haven't updated their address and probably technically aren't eligible to vote where they are registered. So we're trying to get them registered in the right place. It's not that they're committing fraud. It's just that, a lot of voters are not aware of the most efficient and fast ways to get their information updated, or they think it's automatic. So, we have that. We have a very rare occurrence of people who are maybe from a country where every person who lives there is required to vote, whether they're a citizen or not. And so they think they're supposed to vote, or, they don't realize they're not supposed to vote if they're not a citizen. So, but even that is so rare. I think I'm aware of about 2 people in my 16 years that have ever voted that shouldn't have voted in Lansing. So, it's just, it's not, the bigger problem is the number of people who don't vote. For every fraud, there are tens of thousands of people who just didn't vote. So that to me is the bigger problem. We have to make it easier and encourage citizens over 18 to get out and exercise their rights.
Yeah, but thanks very much. That was a really good explanation of how the process works there and how, it sounds like vote by mail is just as secure, if not even more secure than what goes on in the precincts on election day.
Yeah, there's more verifications. You're mailing it usually to their, 98% of the time you're mailing it to their home registered address. So you're tying it to the fact that they're at, that they're in your community. You're comparing the signature to the signature on their driver's license, 99% of the time. So there's a lot of verifications in place with the vote by mail that in the polling place, they walk into the room, maybe they have an ID, maybe they don't. I'm not a strong believer that we should require ID to vote, but they sign an application to vote. There's no ability to verify that signature. There's no way to know where they live because they just walked in the door. So I think vote by mail is a very secure and safe way to vote.
And speaking of where they live, and something I'd like for both of you to weigh in on here. We live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and unfortunately, despite that, we're having more and more people in our society and in our state who are homeless or who are housing insecure, especially as the federal government possibly rolls back some of the coronavirus aid. What are the best ways for people who are homeless or maybe just don't have a permanent address and are in between places to be able to vote, as they still obviously have that right to go vote?
We have in Lansing, we have a lot of people registered to vote at the shelters, and they allow them to receive mail there, and they stay there from time to time. So that's, in Lansing at least, that's the most common and easiest way to register. There is a provision of the law that allows people to register at what's called a non-traditional address, where they can actually say what intersection or what streets that they live near. With that, they also have to have a mailing address so that we can send them a voter ID card. But that's a couple of ways that people who are homeless or couch surfing can maintain their voting ability. And unfortunately, with the same day registration or last 15 days, you do have to verify your address. So you're going to need something that shows, that shows your name and your address on it. So that's a little bit easier to take care of if you do it outside of that 14-day window, so that you're not having, because if you're at VOA, you might not have a utility bill at that address.
Great, yeah. And Zaineb, I'd love for you to weigh in just sort of on the larger state level, if if anything about this that the Secretary of State's office deals with, or that you might be hearing from other clerks in other precincts. I know that Chris is sometimes an exception to the rule here. He's one of the more exceptional clerks that we have. But yeah, so if you could respond on the state level with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Chris's response is probably is on target, because we do the same thing with identifications as well. When someone comes with an ID and they don't have an address, they usually either have used the shelter that they're at or a cross address. So I would say that educating about that piece is really important. The way we can, one of the things that I wanted to mention in the previous conversation when we were talking about fraud is that I think we can all agree that we're going to have a lot of misinformation that will be funneled through social media and through many different outlets, unfortunately. And conversations like this and, information that Chris just gave, which is extremely important about, if you are homeless, what are the protocols that you should take, is extremely important. And more important than the information itself is how much we can actually distribute it among influencers who can make sure that other people know that as well. I think that the conversation of fraud has been on the hot topic, but more importantly is the topic of misinformation that's going to be poured into our social media and how we are going to combat that. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was actually it was a quote that was given. It said, fraud in voting by mail is even more rare on average. It occurs once in a state every 6 to 7 years, according to Heritage Foundation database, which is a very conservative database. So just to tell you that, just to show you that that sometimes we want to focus on something that really doesn't have any life, versus the real conversation is how are we going to combat that misinformation that's going to be poured into our, that our voters are going to have in front of them. There is a lot of security protocols that the clerks and the state has been working with, DHS, and ensuring that, voter protection is extremely important, and that we have the right protocol in place, that if something like that does happen, that we have the right process in place to report it, and it's taken down immediately. So that's one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about fraud is that in particular. But I think in regards to the homeless population, I think Chris just was said on that piece.
Great, thank you. And so we had another really good question from one of our supporters who's here tonight, from John Kusku, who's a high school teacher. I think a good segue here, Chris was mentioning the fact that so many election workers, we may be losing a few election workers who are nervous about coming out in the times of COVID. And, speaking from personal experience, at my polling place in Holt, just south of Michigan, or just south of Lansing here, the folks who work there do a really, really great job. And it's almost all senior citizens who are some of the most, the most at-risk populations from coronavirus. So it would be wonderful to see an army of new people and of young people coming in to take on these roles during the election. So I'd love to get sort of a pitch from each of you about how people can get involved, either to volunteer or to work for the clerk's office on election day to make sure that our election's done properly. And John's question, which I think plays into that, he says, I am a high school teacher. What am I allowed to do and say to students to get them to vote? And can I help them to register in person? Can I help them to register online? Can I encourage them to vote? What is and is not allowed? So whoever wants to take the first stab there.
I'll jump in. I think you can do a lot. We have LCC professors who do voter registration drives among their students. You can't require them. I think you probably can't give credit to them for registering, although I'm not sure about that. But we can provide voter registration forms to you, mail-in voter registration forms. You can give them that web address, michigan.gov/vote, where if they have to use that to register, you do have to have a Michigan state ID or driver's license, because that's how they verify the identity. But yeah, you can definitely provide that information, and you can encourage them to work the polls. Under Michigan law, you do have to be a registered voter if you're 18 years or older, but we also are allowed to hire 16 and 17-year-olds. So, a lot of schools don't have school on election day. This year, a lot of things are going to be kind of up in the air, but, we love it when we get high school kids, because one of the important roles now in running elections is the person who sits at the laptop and checks the voters in. And, we love our seniors, but not all of them are very good with the computer. So, having somebody who's got that familiarity and comfort with the computer is really helpful. We have an online application at lansingmi.gov/clerk. And it's a shortened form. There's a legal requirement that election workers fill out an application in their own hand. So we use the recruiting tool of the online form. And then once we have them at training, we have people fill out the legally required form. But we are always hiring people. Sometimes it's not just numbers though. Like I said, we have the people using the laptop. That's kind of a specialized role, and it takes some extra training and usually a little bit of experience. Chairs, co-chairs requires some training and some hands-on experience. But if we can get people in August, we can maybe elevate them to a high role in November.
So I'll just jump in on that, because this is a pretty exciting question for me. So I was registered to vote by my teacher, which was really nice, but the teachers being involved in voting activities is not something that's foreign. A big shout out to the Dearborn League of Women Voters, who actually go into the schools in Dearborn and Dearborn Heights, and the students. It's funny because I have nieces and nephews in both districts, and they were like, oh, they came and they registered us to vote. So it's like a common thing for them to come in. They register, the students to vote. They give them a little bit of information about their rights. So I would definitely encourage you to, utilize the applications that are at your disposal, whether it's the online registration form or if it's, downloading the voter registration form and filling it out. But I think it would be really cool to do two things. And I think that especially with young millennial, I don't know, are they Z's now? I don't know. I'm like a millennial, so I get lost. But what's really cool about them is that they are really active on social media. And when we talk about influencers, they are influencers in their own circle. So trying to utilize them to be our educators would be, on regards to misinformation, is really important. And, you know, actually the state, the department actually put together a media toolkit with, you know, little graphics that can be put up, you know, by organizations or by individuals to educate people about voting. So it'd be really cool if you could incorporate, like, hey, yes, you can register to vote, and you should work on election day because, you know, your democracy needs you. And I'll go into democracy MVP in a second. But it is also, you know, what is your role and responsibility in ensuring that those around you are educated and are also involved? So I can definitely provide you with that toolkit, Sean, and if you want to send it out. But it would be really great to, you know, utilize the youth for what they're like really experts at, which is like the TikTok videos, the social media. Well, I was told Facebook is not for young people. It's Instagram. So I have Facebook, so whatever. Okay. But what next thing is democracy MVP. So as Sean mentioned, there was a fear that there would be a shortage of poll workers. And because, you know, the senior community is the one of the communities that come out in such strong droves to come out and work on election day, you know, we've seen a decrease in some of them coming out because of COVID-19. We created a program called Democracy MVP because we believe poll workers are the most valuable players on election day, right? I thought it was cool. And the idea of Democracy MVP is you can actually register through this our link, and I can provide the information to Sean as well. And you basically put your information in and where you're located at, and we'll actually send your information to a clerk, and the clerk will contact you in regards to training and placing you in a polling location. So I definitely agree with, you know, democracy is a team sport. You'll hear the secretary always say that, and we all have you know, a part to play. And I think, you know, as an educator, empowering your students with registering to vote, yes, but activating them and, you know, giving them the tools that they need to really get this message out there and be a part of something that is going to be really historical. And I think Michigan is going to make history this year. And I, you know, for me coming to the department at this time, that was one of the things that I really wanted to be a part of, is I wanted to be a part of Michigan's history. And I think that, you know, if you're a history teacher, you can always play to that, but yeah, I'll definitely provide that information to you, Sean, so that, you know, you can distribute it out to panelists.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll make sure we share that out on social media and get it to folks who are interested there. And, you know, I could just to say for a minute, you know, I think one or both of you mentioned earlier about how important it is to have a good team around you. And I, for one, could not be more thankful that we have Secretary Benson and you, Zaineb, and the amazing team at the Secretary of State's office, who, you know, your budget is not what it should be. You have the redistricting ballot initiative. You have the voting rights ballot initiative. So many things coming at you guys. We're so glad to have people in charge who really care about making sure that our democratic process works. One other question I wanted to make sure we address tonight is, so I know a lot of us are used to the election night tradition of rapidly refreshing our computer screens, whatever it is, to you know, see what's happening with the results and see where the results are coming in. And this is sort of a complicated question. So A, should we expect with the increased absentees election results to come in slower? And B, is there any sort of move that the Michigan legislature could make to speed up that process and to give you guys the support that you would need? And have they taken any steps in that direction?
Well, I wish they had taken some steps. We had given them several steps. They don't seem to be taking them. They've enacted one law, and that law allows clerks to work jointly to form an absent voter counting board. But that really does very little in terms of really helping us to get where we need to be. We are not going to have 20,000 absentee ballots counted in a 13-hour period. Under current election law, we can't start processing them until 7 a.m. election day. So the polls closed at 8 p.m. That 13-hour window just is really not going to cut it. We're going to be well into the night or morning. And, you know, we tried to get additional equipment. We got our city to budget. We got the state to say they would, the Secretary of State offered to pay for a share of that. And the vendor can't get it to us by August. And, you know, we wanted to have 2 in August and see what else we might need for November. But I think we're going to have our 1 high-speed tabulator in Lansing in August. And, you know, it's hard to predict how late the night will go in terms of getting results. But, you know, we've asked for things like allowing us to start processing on Monday. You know, even the day before would be a big help. So a bill got introduced that was short of what we really wanted. It would have allowed us to open the ballots and, you know, do the part of comparing the ballot number, and then leave them in the secrecy sleeve locked up overnight. And, you know, then we would have a head start on the next day. We could not get that through the legislature. There was a bill introduced that would allow us to, you know, have a relief team, a different shift come in at 8 o'clock on election night to take over for the people who will have been there for 13 hours and will be exhausted by that time. That bill did not get passed by the legislature. You know, we've talked about, should we be allowed time after the election, since, you know, in many communities like Ann Arbor and East Lansing, they're going to have thousands of ballots that they get on election day because of the same day registration with the college students. So giving them a head start doesn't give them that much of a head start because they have to wait for the voters to show up. But, you know, we've asked for lots of tools, and so far it's a bit of a shutout.
Wow, that's you know, disappointing, but unfortunately not surprising. And I'd like to, you know, let all of our folks know who are listening that there are people who can change that before the November election. And the 2 main folks who could really do a lot to change that and make sure that our clerks and their staffs and our folks at the Secretary of State can do everything they need to count the vote in a timely manner, make sure everything's secure on election day, are Speaker of the House Lee Chatfield and Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, who, if those 2 got behind these bills, I'm sure they could sail through the legislature. So if anybody would like to advocate on that, Speaker Chatfield's office number is 517-373-2629, and you can leave him a message advocating for him to do something about this and make sure that those bills pass so that our election workers get the support that they need. And yeah, Senator Shirkey as well would be another good one to contact, and his office number is 517-373-5932. So yeah, I wanted to thank both of you for joining us tonight. Just sort of, I'd love to get your closing thoughts. And Zainab, let's start with you for your closing thoughts. What else would you like people to know?
First, let me start off by saying thank you so much, Sean, and to Clearwater Fund for putting this together. I think we need many more moving forward into November. I think education is going to be a huge part of the success of this in the election in November and in August. And I think that we can do it together by providing the resources to the right people to get to the right hands. And I say that by meaning we need to get it in everybody's hands. So we won't be shy with sharing resources that we've created with at the department. And we hope that, you know, for individuals think that we can do things better, please let us know. I also wanted to mention all the links that I had mentioned. I'll provide to you, Sean, so you can you can send it to everyone. And it's basically, you know, democracy MVP. Make sure, you know, participate and on election day, become a poll worker. There's registering online, getting your AV application, you know, knowing your rights and what you can and can't do is really important. But I'm really looking forward to, you know, moving forward with all of you come November, because I think that if we all put our hands together and really work as a team, I think we can really make sure that everyone has everything that they need in order to be an educated voter and to ensure that they feel safe and secure. And that, you know, like as the secretary says, you know, making voting as easy as possible and harder to cheat. So I'm really looking forward to being on everyone's team and moving forward on this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, your closing thoughts.
Well, Sean, thank you, and Clean Water Action for having us. Earlier, you said you love to vote in person. I just want to say in 2020, the patriotic thing is probably to vote at home. I hope everyone does that. I hope we blow the doors off of every voter turnout record that we have in the state of Michigan. We have the potential to do it. When the people speak through their vote and their voice, great things can happen. And we need great things to happen here in Michigan and the United States. So please participate and make sure your voice is heard.
Great. Thank you again, both so much for joining us. And I'd also like to thank all of you who have joined to listen in this evening, as well as Jen Schlicht and Meredith Gillies, our Clean Water Action comms team tonight, for making this run so smoothly. And thanks to Chris and Zaineb, our wonderful panelists. Thank you both for all that you do to ensure that our elections are safe and accessible, especially this year during the COVID pandemic. And for those of you who are listening in, if you'd like to see Clean Water Action also endorses candidates for election, and you can find our endorsements at cleanwateraction.org/mi, including one primary endorsement we've made this year in the congressional race in the 13th district for Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. There's not really a better friend to the environment in Congress right now. So we encourage everybody to get out and vote by mail, or if you can't by mail for some reason, in person this coming Tuesday. And also to remember November 3rd, despite what is said from the White House, Congress is the only one who can change the date of the November 3rd, 2020 election, and they won't be doing so. So make sure you get out to vote by November 3rd. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.